r/AskReddit. Why did that guy at work finally get fired? Friend of a VP, I'll call him the dude, got hired to be our product manager, basically a cat herder for the developers and its staff trying to get things done. His first day on the job he institutes agile methodology and decides on 8:30 AM mandatory stand-up meetings. Our best programmer, a dyed-in-the-wool neckbeard, never gets to work before 9, but often works at night, on his own time, to write solid code, is always 5 minutes late. This drives the dude crazy, so the first 10 minutes of our 5-minute stand-up is spent ranting about lateness, respect, etc. This goes on for about a week. The next week he decides to change the stand-up to 8 am. Nobody at all is usually in the office at 8. I live an hour away. When half the people don't show, the dude spends an hour ranting, throwing papers, literally stamping his feet. Meanwhile he has also demanded that it give him a brand new laptop that cost $8,000 for reasons, and a personal laser printer for another $1,000. It is also beginning obvious that he doesn't know how to use any bug tracking software, can't send an email without CCing at least 2 VPs, and had no grasp of the development languages we use or the databases or federal regulations we need to obey. No, I can't email you a spreadsheet of patient data to your mail address. We started getting suspicious when the weekend after his first week he came in and rearranged his office so the computer monitor faced inside the office when it used to be 90 degrees to the door, requiring people to shimmy by the desk to come in, but blocking any view of his screen. Another couple of weeks of half-hour tantrums, 20-person email chains about CSS bugs, disparaging personal attacks on nearly every developer in the department, and a complete lack of skill was culminated by a big package arriving in his office from a motorcycle retailer. He was off visiting another office on the day a package was delivered, leaking a fluid, so it was opened and found to contain about $3,000 in custom dirt bike parts, bought on the company credit card, and an expense report had already been filed for that exact amount listing team training materials. The it guy he had belittled because if his Jamaican accent checked his personal files and ratted him out. The it guy then pulled the dude's brow history and found he spent approximately 6 hours every day cruising dirt bike and sports sites, plus an occasional blog post found by searching what is a product owner and how to be a manager stuff. The whole development team went to the ad manager, declared a mutiny, and pretty much demanded him or us. It still took another 3 months to fire him before the dude finally rode off into the sunset. I was an office apprentice when this middle-aged lady came in for an interview to become a PA on the same team as me. I honestly thought she was one of the sweetest and most polite people I'd ever met, so I was hopeful she'd get the job. A week later she started and turned out to be one of the worst people I've ever met. Anything you said to her she would interpret it as offensive and accused me, her boss, and to senior managers we both pat for as xenophobic because she was Spanish and out to get her. For 6 months I had to put up with her glaring over at me from her desk, making up accusations, not doing her job properly, and generally making it a very tense working environment. I got a job in the id department, and she got a job in another department doing the same sort of role. She called me and my new boss up every day in id to ask for the Wi-Fi password. It was for work use only, and she had absolutely no need for the Wi-Fi as she didn't have a work issued phone or laptop. She was contracted to always be at her desktop. Literally every day she did this for weeks. Finally I heard that it hadn't taken long for her to fall out with her new colleagues, and she too was convinced they were plotting against her and talking about her when she left the room, so she secretly recorded them. She took the recording to the director thinking she was going to get 2 people fired, but he basically looked at her, said, "You can either resign now or we will fire you." She left immediately and everyone across multiple departments was relieved. Had that guy assigned under me. A bit weird, always seemed a little off and not really social, but a decent worker when kept half an eye on him once or twice a day, so he thought he was being monitored. Had Vader's theme set as his ex-wife's ringtone for his phone, and whenever she would call, at least a couple times a week he would stare at the screen longingly for a couple rings before picking up. He was outside on a smoke break, but had left his phone behind. I was walking out back as it went off, so went to pick it up and take it to him as I went. Just being polite. Reaching for the phone though, I froze in horror. While the ringtone for his ex was the Vader theme song, the screen picture was a completely naked, sleeping picture of his ex-wife's daughter, her 8-year-old daughter. Being former military, everyone present immediately got new orders barked at them. You get me, the police on the line. You get security, dipshit is not leaving. While I call the big boss. Needless to say, we got police in immediately, and he was terminated that day. Yes, it turned out he has been abusing the girl, plus turns out he was living with a 15-year-old girlfriend following his divorce, and the police raided his office computer as well as his computer at home. Aside from the stepdaughter and underage girlfriend, he was also charged with possession and distribution of something like 600 articles of child pornography. For those that want the happy ending, he is currently still in jail on a 28-year sentence. On a completely unrelated second instance, fired another guy for taking home expired client medications and falsifying the paperwork to say the meds had been destroyed. We had a real winner a few years ago. We'll call him T. We work in a dispatch center for emergency services, 911, police, fire, etc. T was hired to help staff the place, which was severely short-handed. T was a large black man, and that mattered to absolutely nobody aside from T. The center staff was pretty diverse, but to listen to T, everybody including other black coworkers were out to get him because of his race. T had several weeks of pre-job training to learn the systems and basic procedures, then was sent to me for on-the-job training. After 2 days with me, I catch T lying 3 times about what he was taught at the pre-job training. Nobody taught us that kind of crap. I document it, and coupled with his poor performance, recommend he not be made permanent after his probationary training period. I'm overruled because of the staff shortage and he's fully hired. T keeps his head down and lets others carry his slack for weeks. Doesn't improve, doesn't try. Starts hanging around the canteen/kitchen area and cornering people alone, saying stuff like, "You want to give me $5? I know you do," and making advances on female coworkers. Several women complain. He's admonished by the supervisor, stops that behavior, but starts telling everyone that the women who complained are racist. Few weeks later, he swaps a shift with someone who'd worked in the building for many years. T requested the swap so he could go on a date. When the day comes for T to work his side of the swap, he no-shows, then lies and says he never agreed to the swap and the other person must have forged his signature because that person is racist. According to T, this is easily refuted. Why would the other person have worked T's shift earlier in the week? And why wasn't T there if the whole thing was a setup? T is written up for no-showing and then lying. T files an hour complaint against the supervisor, saying they're racist and out to get him. Our counsels the supervisor to be more sensitive. Few weeks after that, T leaves work early without telling anyone, and before being relieved by the next shift, he leaves a 911 station unattended for 20 minutes. Different supervisor calls his cell, tells T to come back to work immediately. T refuses, says he'll deal with it the next day. Supervisor writes him up for insubordination and dereliction, recommends he be fired. T files a complaint against this supervisor, accusing her of being racist. Supervisor responds to the hour complaint with her wedding photo of her and her black husband. Hours quashed T's racism complaint, but still didn't fire him. The rest of us were told by the supervisor that one more incident and he was gone, and that he had been told the same. Few months go by without incident. The center shuts down and all of us are transferred to different buildings around the state. Few weeks after that, I hear through the grapevine that T is pulling the same kind of shit at his new location. A few weeks after that, one of the workers who had been at that location for a long time called T out in front of the entire building staff for being lazy and a liar. T responds by telling the guy, again, in front of about 25 witnesses, that he has a gun in his car, and that if he ever saw the other person outside work, that T was going to shoot that person in the face. The other person filed a complaint, backed up by 24 witnesses, who all stepped up and demanded that T be arrested and fired. His employment was, finally, subsequently terminated, but he wasn't arrested. The union we belonged to declined to assist him in keeping his job. The last anyone heard of him was when he cleaned out his locker and was escorted out, yelling he was going to sue because his civil rights were violated. That was a few years ago now, so maybe he's still preparing his lawsuit. Edit. TL. Dr. COWORKER repeatedly flaunts the rules and claims anyone who complains is racist. Finally fired after threatening to shoot someone. A depressive guy I'll call Adam, whose every waking moment and every spoken word was being down on the business, the staff, himself, the customers. We really tried to give him reasons to pep up some. He stated a few times that he would never consider therapy or antidepressants when it was suggested to him that he needed treatment for depression. His reasoning was he doesn't want to go around high all the time, that's just running away, and a whole heap of other toxic reasons he picked up from somewhere. Adam was part of a team of 3 people in one production area, and he'd arrive and proceed to browse the net for 2 hours in the morning, go to lunch early, come back late, and spend a couple of hours again in the afternoon browsing the net. His browser history showed the same few sites over and over, and they weren't even good ones. News.com.au, Entertainment Weekly, Cassagear and a couple of other movie ones. It'd be an exceptionally good day when he'd be present for 8 hours and work for 3. The 2 team members who worked with him complained to management repeatedly that it was utterly demoralizing to have them running around in a constant rush, always behind on work, because Adam wouldn't pull his weight, while management was too weak-willed to pull him aside and directly address the problem. Instead, after a few complaints from the other team members, management would directly push some work to Adam for a couple of days, and Adam would begrudgingly do the job, complain about management giving him things that were above his pay grade, and eventually get them done late and badly. But management went right back to ignoring the problem until the day the other 2 team members raised the issue in a meeting I was part of. They pretty clearly stated the problems they had with Adam, and when it was clear management's only response was claiming they found Adam too difficult to deal with, they said they thought that'd be the answer and handed in their resignations. Adam was finally fired that day. The other team members kept to their resignation schedule, while management had presumed, but never asked or verified, that they wouldn't be quitting as soon as Adam was gone. With all 3 team members gone, that fucked things up in one production area for months. So much knowledge lost on one day. I looked up Adam a few months ago. He'd taken his own life a couple of years after being fired. I'm a software engineer. My company hired a software architect who specialized in a different field. About a week after joining, he declared we need to restructure the whole software. So far so good, except the new structure was not clear to anyone but himself. He could not explain what was wrong with the existing structure. Now, software engineering is still engineering. There's some leeway, but ultimately there are right and wrong answers. Reasonably adept engineers should be able to communicate and convince each other of ideas, barring their egos. This guy, though, just sort of made up his own language. Like he'd tell you the software needs to be made of boondoggles connected to flimbusters, and you'd ask what he meant by flimbuster and he'd just launch into a long, 10 uninterrupted minutes explanation at the end of which you still had no idea. While this was going on, he was generally being annoying. Nothing earth-shattering, but he'd leave empty coffee cups on people's desks, would pull them in a brief discussion that would take up over an hour, badmouthed some of us to the rest of us, badmouthed some of us to upper management, generally sleazy stuff. It went on for 2 months. 2 months where we engineers genuinely couldn't figure out if the guy's a misunderstood genius or a scam artist, because nobody could figure out what he's on about, and he was extremely adamant about whatever it was, repeatedly bashing the existing architecture for being a dead end. It ended when one of us basically called him on his bullshit. Told management we can't figure out what to do here, let's take all the time we need to make it concrete, and just spent entire days locked in a room with him and management, slowly forcing him to go into details. The end game was for Mr. Architect to write a document explaining in full detail what needs to be done. He had 2 weeks. He didn't show up to work after they passed, and the document he left behind was just the chapter headings. I think we dodged a bullet, but the story is so crazy I don't think I'll ever be free of the doubt that maybe he really had a good idea I was too dumb to comprehend. Who I have too. When I was working in retail at a Barnes & Noble, we got a manager from another store. She was not a good manager. We had awesome managers, and she was just not as good. Then we found out she got fired because she was balancing the safe using IOUs and gave a copy of our stalkie to her boyfriend. The guy who didn't get fired there though was the guy who was banned from every other Barnes & Noble in our area for sexually harassing the female employees. And one night, when he came upon me setting up the Valentine's Day table, alone, you bet I was scared. He made some creepy comment I've forgotten now, and I all but bolted to a more populated area of the store. Another person who got fired is the worst person I've ever had to work with. We worked in support for a video game. Here's a tip: if you ever work in gaming, do not hire your Uber fans. It will only cause you problems. This guy was an Uber fan of the game and became a support rep, the Game Masters. Being a GM gives you a lot of power. ESP in this game you could create any item, summon players, teleport players to any location, and give people temp bans from within the game. It was incredibly useful for events and for helping players out who lost things, but it was a lot of power to give someone who actively plays the game. As a coworker, the guy was a massive hole. He would fall asleep at his desk and his shirt would ride up his belly. We had investors go through the office on tours and they absolutely saw this. He said he was surprised there were girls in our department because girls don't play video games. He was serious. When none of the girls responded to his advances, he called us all frigid bitches. He took the Nerf gun fights too far and shot someone in the eye from a foot away. None of this got him fired. He also farted constantly, but that's more annoying than something you could fire someone over. Then we started getting reports from players that a GM was abusing his powers. He was giving out bans to people he didn't like and giving items to his guild. They gathered tons of proof, but you know how it is, players always think people are cheating with the GMs. Seriously, one time I had players accuse people of cheating when a group literally carried me through a dungeon during a live stream. Literally carried, they picked me up, and I contributed nothing but color commentary. But the reports kept coming in, so one of my coworkers investigated it and presented it to our manager. They compared the times of the reports to the times the guy was working and found that yes, he was doing this at work. She presented this to our director, who was like, yup, dude's fired. He had the guy's last paycheck printed and was ready. He called the guy in, and the guy just broke down crying, sobbing, wailing and beating his chest. So he got another chance. Few months later, reports come in again, evidence was gathered and presented. This time it fucking stuck, and he was canned. That's probably one of a very few times I was happy someone got fired. Oh, this question just made my coworkers, and I shudder at the thought of that guy. We'll call the subject of our story Scott. My job is an elf at the mall working with the big man himself. We have a bunch of interactive stuff for the kids before they even get to Santa, and so most of the employees are up front guiding the children through the experience. Scott came onto the job because he did photography in his spare time and he wanted to get better at it, but most of the time the manager takes the photos and we're up front. I don't mind that, but Scott hated it. Scott also was under the assumption that he was coming on as an assistant manager, but in reality he was just a regular employee. When Scott was sent up front, he made our lives hell. He insisted on only taking the African American kids through, even if we have a line of 40 kids and only one African American child. Scott would literally not take a group through until that one child came up to the front of the line. He spent one day up front attempting to fix one of the badge printers, which was in all honesty working, which left me as the only guide. Every time he was up front he complained about how he should be back there taking photos and how this wasn't what he signed up for. But we needed the staff, so my manager was hesitant on firing him, instead just slowly putting him on the schedule less and less. Now, my job has a simple dress code for what we wear under our elf uniforms: khakis, white collared shirt, and black shoes. Mind you, these can be sneakers, so long as they have a black sole and laces. On that day Scott walked into work and immediately took a 2-hour break without even telling anyone. He clocked in and then left. When the mall finally tracked him down, he told them that our manager said he could do so. He ran out to his car to get something before he walked back on set and came back with brown Uggs on and tried to go to work. Manager was furious and this was the last straw, so she told him to go and not come back until he has proper shoes on. Scott asked for his paycheck to go buy some, turned away, and then proceeded to call my boss and ask if he could wear his Uggs, and complained when she said no. That was the last I saw of him until 3 weeks later, when he brought his family in and let them run rampant through the set. Apparently he claimed Santa dropped his nephew and tried to sue the company, but the cameras on set said otherwise. Oh man. This is gonna get buried, but it's worth sharing for whoever makes it this far. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese several years ago, but I will never forget this one dude who got fired there. Let's call him Jacob, because frankly, I do not remember his name and it really doesn't matter. Jacob was not very bright. I worked in the showroom as a party host. Jacob started off there as one of those dudes in the black and white ref outfits that mainly worked maintenance on the games and machines in the play areas. One day Jacob was looking at some of the children's prizes up front and decided to take one of those comically large and non-practical pens. You know, those like foot-long plastic pens that are like a couple inches in diameter, and hollow it out to smoke. We'd out of it on his lunch break in the back room. Literally just holding the back door open while smoking weed at a Chuck E. Cheese. Well, our manager smelled it from the office, which was like 20 feet away from where he was doing this, and chased him into a forest in the back of the establishment. We thought that was the end of Jacob, as well as it should have been. It was not. The only consequence of him creating a weed smoking apparatus out of a children's toy and smoking up while at work was that he was slightly demoted to being a busboy. He basically had to bring food out to people's tables and clean off tables, and he would also be our designated dude to dress up as the rat and walk around when we needed him to. Well, this didn't last long. A customer comes up to me at some point and holds out her pizza and says very politely, "I think we ordered pepperoni, but there is none on here." She was right. There was no pepperoni on her pizza. Just a bunch of round holes in the cheese, where pepperoni had clearly been at one point. I go over to Jacob and ask him if he knew anything about it. He looks at me and goes, "It looked so good, man. I had to try it." So this schmuck ate this family's pepperoni off their pizza while taking it to their table. Who does that? Well, now he's fired, right? Nope. Another demotion. Now he literally comes to work and is designated to only be Chucky his entire shift. Which is ridiculous, because you don't have the rat walk around all day. Like a couple minutes every hour or so. And in most cases people just switch off doing it because it's pretty fun to do because of the kids' reactions to you. But Jacob was so useless at everything else, and they wouldn't fire him, that he would just sit in the break room all day, half dressed as Chucky, and every hour for a couple minutes he would throw on the head and walk around. This went on for a couple of months. Then one day I'm walking around the party room with Jacob in the Chucky suit, and kids are everywhere running up to him all excited. He is just dancing around and doing the normal thing, but then it happened. A little girl, must have been like 3 or 4 or something, came up to him and handed him her jacket. Who knows what goes through little kids' heads, right? Well, Jacob, having as small of a brain as he had, decided he would try and put on this 4-year-old little girl's jacket while in the Chucky suit. Let me tell you, trying to put on a children's jacket is basically like putting on handcuffs, because it is clearly too small for anyone other than a child. Well, that's exactly what happened. He was basically handcuffed. Then the most magical sequence of events happened. He is dancing around while handcuffed with this child's jacket, and you do not have very good vision in this suit either. So he then trips on a child, no joke, and then loses his balance and can't catch himself because his hands are tied up behind his back, and he comes crashing down on one of the party tables and his Chucky head comes rolling off. The audible gasps and screams that happened at that moment, I will never forget. It was a truly horrifying sight and experience that I'm certain traumatized some kids for life. And it's mean, but Jacob was a pretty gross looking teenager too. He had greasy, unruly, longer, shaggier black curly hair, bad acne, a big nose. Dude was going through his super awkward teenage years. Point being, to the children it looked like some kind of troll or hobbit was inside of their beloved Chuck E. Cheese. So it was ultra shocking and horrifying. But yeah, we all laughed our asses off in the back after that happened, and my manager fired him right there amidst the laughter. I guess there was no place left to demote him. TLDR.